Welcome to our latest Book Reporter Talks to interview with our guest, Sheila Weller. Sheila's latest book is Carrie Fisher, A Life on the Edge. She's a New York Times best-selling author and an award-winning journalist, and she's the author of 7 books, and we've got some of them here today. First is Girls Like Us, which was about Carole King, Carly Simon, and Joni Mitchell, which is how I first got to know you back in 2008. I cannot believe this. Right. And her 2014 book was The News Sorority, where she took a look at the lives of Diane Sawyer, Katie Couric, and Christiane Amanpour, and the ongoing, imperfect, complicated triumph of women in TV. Long title. Really long title. But then you've also got a memoir that you did in 2003 called Dancing at Ciros, and it's a family's love, loss, and scandal on Sunset Strip, which is about her family's nightclub in LA that was cited by the Washington Post and called a substantial contribution to American social history.
That was very nice to hear.
Which I absolutely love. Yeah. So welcome, Sheila. It's so nice to finally be meeting you after all these years, finally in the same room. I think that many people can tell you exactly where they were when they found out that Carrie Fisher had passed away.
Yes, exactly.
I was on a very long DMV line in New Jersey, and we were all on our phones, and you could see how the news was spreading as people were just getting sad faces as they were, standing there. Right. Where were you?
I think I was in front of my computer.
Really?
And as I often am.
It's where you spend most of your day, right?
I do, really. And I saw Carrie Fisher has a heart attack. And I guess I felt that the end was near. I just intuited it.
Just intuited that was what happened.
And then it was a couple of days later when it was announced. But it was definitely just sad, gripping, headline news, and caused one to think a lot about her life, about her significance, and how wonderful Postcards from the Edge was, and just a lot of things rolled into one.
All rolled into one.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it also happened over the holidays where people had so much time to reflect on it. And Carrie loved the holidays so much. Her house was always decorated like Christmas.
Right.
So I think that the timing for people who had gotten to know her so intimately was also special.
Right, exactly.
It's like super sad time of the year. So what made you decide to write the book?
Everybody asks me that. Well, as a writer who writes about women and significant women in the culture and popular culture, I had always been aware of her significance. We all had. Right. I loved postcards. I'm from LA. I'm from the Hollywood kind of the non-celebrity version of that industry, Hollywood. And I knew she was complex. I didn't know that she was quite as complex as I learned when I spoke to people and really dug into her life. But she just seemed like a very good subject, a very a woman who was significant. Also, right after she died, when the women's marches, all over America, the young women who hadn't even been born when the first Star Wars came out were hoisting Princess Leia posters, and I realized she was a feminist heroine hiding in plain sight, or not even hiding. She was out there. Princess Leia was a feminist heroine, and the way Carrie carried herself and behaved and spoke and emojied over the last few years, going back at the age shamers and the weight shamers, was very quote unquote badass feminism. With a star and a halo and a
and an asterisk
in the sky at the 4th of July in Hong Kong, as she wanted to do. So, and Wishful Drinking was a one-woman play that was so successful and had women, normal women, non-celebrity women, feeling very relieved and validated that somebody who was a Hollywood royalty woman shared their concerns and shame, and getting back at the shame. And I think it was very healing for a lot of women. So
I think I love the line in there where she's talking about wear a metal bikini and when you're 19, and then people expect you to be looking like that for the rest of your life.
Yes, you have a contract to look like that for the rest of your life.
The rest of your life.
Got her on it, and it was painful for her at the end.
Yeah,
she cried.
Yeah, it was just one of those shows where we would watch that, and it was just like she put it all out there. Everything was out there. I personally love the map where she did the trajectory of what her life was, how she got to where she was, and whatever. And I was just thinking it was just an extraordinary piece. So at that point, you decided you were going to do the book. And
I thought I would give it a shot.
Give it a shot.
Yeah.
So you and Carrie were both children of Hollywood. You
Yes,
both
but
grew
she really
up.
was a child of Hollywood.
Well, she was a child of Hollywood, but you were a child of Hollywood when Hollywood was a very different place. I mean, Beverly Hills, the way you describe it, I love the opener, but it's like Danny Thomas's house is across the street and you're going to go trick-or-treating. And like, this is what the world was like there. So it was like a small town full of famous people.
Town, yes.
And was that what it was like when you were growing up there too?
Absolutely, that's what I took it from.
Yeah.
I remembered all those people, Loretta Young and Danny Thomas and all of the people that I mentioned.
It's been a lot of fun going out for Halloween. Really.
It was just normal.
Normal.
It was a small town, and everything was the East Coast. I mean, television was the East Coast. Textbooks were the East Coast. Pictures of trees that were, Berkshire's type trees.
Right.
We had a house in the Berkshires for 22 years, and I remember thinking, this is the kind of real America that we were supposed to have.
You were supposed to have, but out there it was like all conjectured. It was all constantly like being on a set.
Well, it was palm trees and dirt-filled mountains and just and Alhambran Spanish architecture. It was very different. We didn't see it reflected in textbooks or anything like that.
Yeah, it was like a totally different world.
And then everybody came.
Yeah, well, what's laughing because I remember being out there when I was younger, and there were the tour buses that would go past people's houses, and I'm wondering if they still do that. Like, are there still tour buses that go by? Because that was such a part of the neighborhood.
Yes.
Because it would be like, oh, we're going to stop in front of Lucille Ball's house, and everybody's going to get out and take a photo and things like that.
I think they still are.
Still doing that kind of thing. And you feel like the celebrities today are so different.
Right.
They're in these mansions that are like, tucked away. There, it was like everybody was kind of a real person out on the street.
Out there picking up their newspapers on the lawn. Like normal people.
Right.
Yeah.
And was it like that at school too? Were
Yes,
people just like that at school? It was like you were, the talent show was just a little higher caliber of talent.
I mean, the movie stars' kids would come and go. They would go to boarding school. They would go with their parents on location. But there was not, there was an innocence about it. There wasn't a sense of this is so-and-so's daughter or son. Let's, treat them special. There was an innocence about it.
It was an innocence, and when you write about it, it would just look like it was every neighborhood. It looked like one of those neighborhoods that was a set for Father Knows Best, or one of those shows during those years. Just the houses were bigger and more famous people. So when you open the book, the introduction actually has the Carrie getting onto the plane, being ill on the plane, and having the heart attack on the plane. What made you decide to start with the introduction right there and just put us like right in the most painful place in a lot of ways?
My editor wanted me to do that, and other people who had read it wanted me to do that. I actually had an Overture chapter, which I usually start books with, which is you tell everything at once. It's a bad habit for a writer.
Okay.
Where you kind of want to sum up what's going on and how complex the person is and show off your sources. So that was the original chapter that I worked several months on, I hate to say, or maybe 6 weeks on.
Okay.
And everybody said, no, that's the wrong chapter. You're giving it all away. Start with her on the plane. So that's what I did.
Very, very interesting. So Carrie always shared so much of herself in her books. So what was it like delving beyond those pages? Because Carrie was a pretty open book.
She was, and people said, what was it like, writing about somebody who indeed told everything. You get different perspective from friends and from associates and from people even who had very brief momentary encounters, like somebody who was the publicist on the tour, somebody who met her at a Star Wars convention, somebody who met her at a reading or a speaking engagement with Debbie, a young producer who wanted her in a TV show, and she wasn't willing to do it, but she sat there and talked to the young woman endlessly and shared all these nuggets. So you just find it's wider. It's brings it all out.
Was it hard to get people to talk about Carrie?
Yes.
It was. Okay.
It was hard. Some people didn't talk.
And was it because the book wasn't authorized? Was that the reason, or what do you think it was?
Probably. I mean, maybe. I mean, many people said it was too painful. It was too private. That's the challenge of being a nonfiction writer about famous people.
That's exactly. Yeah. Do you think you were denied access to anybody, or do you think that people just felt it was, I don't want to talk about her?
It's hard to say. I mean, it was known that this book was being done. That's true. So, but I, worked very hard to get the people that I.
You got a lot of people.
And if somebody didn't want to talk, I left them alone. I didn't go after them.
Do you think it would have been different if you'd gotten them to talk? Or do you think that just because the people that you had were so willing to share stories, do you think that that helped instead of somebody trying to varnish a story? You know, sometimes you have to talk about somebody and you just want to tell it in the most positive light, so you kind of varnish it over and you sit there and say,
well, I mean, people did say wonderful things about her, and I went out of my way to include those because there was a lot that was dramatic. But yes, in looking at interviews with the people that, for example, didn't speak to me, there was definitely a sense of talking very positively about her, which people wanted to do anyway. She was really, really loved.
Yeah.
I was just struck by how many people adored her and how many people considered her one of their best friends.
That's what, she was a great friend. She was a really, really, really great friend. That's what came across. We're going to get into that in a minute. What was the biggest surprise that you found when you're talking about people that who were available? Were there
people
moments?
Have asked me that, yeah. I guess how vulnerable she was. That this woman who was the Dorothy Parker of her time and place would spend hours, kind of on the floor with great stage fright on the days of her Postcards from the Edge book tour, and that she wanted to have people sleeping in the bed with her because she was lonely and was afraid that she would have, she was concerned about sleep apnea, and that she didn't want to be alone, and the great vulnerability. The great vulnerability. I mean, when you write about people and women, you do expect vulnerability. It's one of my favorite words, but there was such a contrast between that brittle, witty hauteur and the incredible vulnerability. It was very striking.
She seemed to be so familial to people. Like, people seemed to know her. Do you think it was because the celebrity was always a part of her life? Because she was a celebrity from the day she was born.
Yes, she was, yes. And I think she liked that. I mean, she certainly played it up. She didn't run away from it. And also the candor, the incredible honesty, which is so important. And I think one of the reasons young women love her so much, and in fact, also very, very serious feminists who wouldn't, act up the way she did. Very, I-dotting, T-crossing feminists. She was so incredibly honest. The resonance of someone being that incredibly honest is something we kind of hold on to.
Yeah, she was completely honest. She and her mom had this relationship, was like the umbilical cord hadn't been cut, between the two of them. How did that relationship define her?
She talked about it a lot. She, it went up and down over the years, and people had different feelings about it. At the beginning, her mother was a dazzling star and the beautiful, adorable Debbie Reynolds, and she felt a little intimidated by that. She worked up her own charisma, kind of as a natural part of her personality, and also perhaps to compete with her mother. At a certain point when she went to school in London, she didn't want to, she kind of had a cooling off period with her mother. Even though she was happy at that school and that was a good experience for her, there was a period where she wanted to separate. And that's a normal thing. I mean, I think a lot of the mother-daughter relationship she had with Debbie was very familiar to other girls with their mothers.
Yeah, exactly.
And then later, she really began to appreciate her mother, it seemed, and she spoke admiringly of her. Debbie was unsinkable. Carrie also was unsinkable. And then, of course, toward the end, she called her mother my husband, and they lived in that little compound together.
Little compound together, going back and forth between the houses. What was that special? I think it was on HBO. Bright Lights. With them going back and forth between the two houses. I'm bringing the macaroni and cheese. I'm going back and forth. Was it fun to delve into their relationship and see how it ebbed and flowed through the years?
Yes. Yeah. And people had different feelings. There was one school of thought that Debbie, and I feel this is true, knew how vulnerable Carrie was emotionally and wanted to do anything to save her and protect her, and was always worried about a phone call coming. The other school of thought is that Debbie was a focus puller. That's a phrase that Carrie liked to use, and kind of dominated things all the time, and perhaps had standards higher than what Carrie could meet. So it was interesting. It
was the push-pull kind of relationship, but she also wanted her to succeed. She also wanted her to succeed very much and see what she could do with that. How do you think that Carrie's relationship with her mom influenced her relationship with her own daughter, with Billy?
That I don't know. I mean, I didn't really go into the relationship with her daughter. That's
and I didn't see much on those pages, so it was something completely different. So for a brief time, she was married to Paul Simon, and I always love this line about their relationship. That let me just see if I can do this. No, that you're thinking about this. Okay, do that one. That's really fun.
Don't stand next to me at a party. They'll think we're salt and pepper shakers.
Yeah, because they were both. It was very short. I like the one where they were both flowers and needed attention, and there was no one there to water and nurture the relationship. Right. And there were so many relationships and friendships where Carrie was the caretaker. And what was about this one where there was a clash? I mean, because this one was definitely not that kind of thing for her.
Right. Well, she got famous very young, wildly famous very young. She was a Hollywood baby. It was the 70s, so somebody like Paul Simon was very culturally astute and sophisticated and sensitive, but he was, used to, being a man in a relationship where a woman was, I don't want to say subservient, but there was a comfortable confidence that he had over the women in his life, and she was someone you couldn't do that with.
She was kind of uncontrollable.
She was wildly verbal and had her own money, had her own fame, had a background that was very sophisticated. So there was, and they both worked very hard. They both worked very hard.
And work was a very big important thing to both of them.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is definitely, I think that's where she says nobody was caretaking the relationship.
Right.
We were both the flowers that had to go grow. I always thought that was the best line because it shows like there was no real fault. It was both, we were both just flowers and it wasn't going to really work. I've always felt that she was really sharp. And you really brought that out in these pages of how, dice she was. Talk to us about her edge, like what it was with her that she gave her that like real edge and sharpness.
Well, her friend Selena Cadell said she'd walk into a room and she was charismatic. She wanted to be and she was. And another friend said she had this great knack, even in her 20s, of making other people her sidekick, which is an incredible talent. I mean, we all wish we could do that. But she was very witty, very verbal, and could, as Selena said, she'd bring you to the very edge, to the very brink. She was dangerous. She was funny. When she walked into a room, you just knew it. So there was the charisma and the intelligence and the wit. And the wit,
as you just
tough wit, yeah.
Tough wit, but really super sharp. I've always felt that she was really super sharp and smart, and she was going to keep you on your toes.
Yes, exactly.
And then there was this other side where she wasn't shy about talking about her mental health. And she wasn't shy about what was going on. It took a long time for her to be diagnosed and treated, but she was talking back in the year 2000, which is a long time ago at this point, to be talking about being bipolar, things that people were not talking about. People were not coming out. And a lot of Hollywood stars were dealing with these issues, but they were not being verbal about it. And what do you think made her be so forthcoming?
She was forthcoming. I mean, that is who she was. She had a psychotic break. She spoke about it on Diane Sawyer's show. She had resisted the diagnosis earlier, and she wanted to, she really was a force in destigmatizing bipolar disorder and mental illness in general. She said, I am mentally ill, I can say that. And she was then asked to be the cover girl and subject for a magazine that didn't even exist yet, BP Magazine.
Really?
She was called by a woman who was an entrepreneur starting the magazine. She immediately said yes. She did the same with Psychology Today. So she had a mission to destigmatize bipolar disorder, which we now see ads for drugs for on TV, never did before, and mental illness. Others had done so a little, Patty Duke, but Carrie's, had a larger
manifestation of it. Exactly. Larger manifestation. And when she had her moments, her breaks and whatever, it was big. It was done in typical Carrie Fisher style.
Yes.
Very, very big.
Yes, but she had an influence. And when she said that, I think it did relieve a lot of people, especially women, who had been diagnosed and were hiding it. And I talked to women who were hiding it. An entertainment attorney who's written about it a lot, who said, I would call in from home and make excuses, and it was very, very hard. And Carrie opened the door to being honest about it.
Yeah, and I think that also by being honest about it, then people knew what they were getting into. It's like, okay, if she's going to have an off day, I could at least see it coming. I could figure out what was going on. It wasn't just her being difficult.
Right.
It was a much bigger issue that was going on. The title so sums up, Carrie, like Life on the Edge. Was that always the subtitle?
No, wonderful Sarah Crichton came up with that title.
Okay.
My wonderful editor. I actually wanted to name the book Between Sleep and Awake. That was a line that she gave Tinkerbell in the Steven Spielberg movie Hook, one of her first script doctoring assignments. And there was a lovely little exchange between Tinkerbell and another character. And I'll meet you in the land between sleep and awake. That's where I'll always meet you. That's where I'll be waiting. And I thought Between Sleep and Awake described the contrasts and the paradoxes in her life. Mm-hmm. But that was ditched as the title.
Life on the Edge, I think, totally sums up the way she felt and the way she lived life. Right. At one point, you talk about her home being like a sorority, and it was like constantly there were people coming in and sorority, people going out. Yeah, sorority, and she had like great girlfriends. Mm-hmm. She had girlfriends that she would do wonderful things for and go out of her way and whatever. And then she had that fabulous joint birthday party every year with Penny Marshall, where I really love that no media was invited. And in a world where everybody wants to be seen and known, what was about her about protecting herself at other moments as well to just enjoy?
Well, that's a good point. I mean, it was kind of an exclusive party. It was kind of what the Vanity Fair parties became. But the Vanity Fair parties do have media and did have media. But it was just kind of the in-group party. And people that talked about what happened there and they loved it. And, it was people were actually able to relate. And talk and be real people, even though they were very incredibly famous. Yeah,
and it would always be, you'd always see something from the party, like something that happened at the party. There'd be a picture that'd be dropped or something, but it was still very under wraps of what had gone on. And it's funny, we're shooting this at the beginning of November, and a couple weeks ago I was realizing it would have been her birthday time, and you would have been expecting to see something come out about that. Well, she was public personality. Was it hard to cover stories that hadn't been told? Because we knew so much about her.
Yes and no. I mean, I didn't think about it that much. I mean, I thought about other things. There's a tremendous amount on her, on the web, all over the place. She gave a lot of interviews. She did a lot of interviews. She was in a tremendous amount of movies that we forget about, like Drop Dead Fred. Do you remember that movie?
No, I don't.
Many, like, I don't want to say mediocre movies, but kind of forgotten movies, and plays that opened and closed within a week. She did what she wanted to do. She didn't follow the arc of going for the great.
And it didn't always have to be success. It had to be what I, as an artist, wanted to do.
Right, or just something she felt like doing at the moment and thought this would be fun. But it was, I had my eye on other challenges, so, finding things that hadn't been told wasn't something that I was
that we were chasing down the rabbit hole.
That terribly about,
Yeah. So for years, you've written award-winning pieces as a journalist, as well as books about strong women. How did your experience help you in writing these books, both finding the story and then carving the story and sculpting it together?
Well, it's different when you write for magazines because you have the magazine behind you. I'm doing this for Glamour. I'm doing this for Vanity Fair. When you're doing a book, you're out there on your own. So it's more challenging in that regard. But shaping the story is shaping the story, whether it's book length or magazine length. You want a great lead. You want, I think, a character arc more than anything. Whether it's a woman who went through some experience, a divorce and custody case, friends of a woman who was killed by her husband. Lots of things that you write about, the challenges of women in different situations, or a cultural world, like I wrote about the surfers, I wrote about the history of the Summer of Love. You want a kind of an arc. How did the situation begin? How did the, couple begin? How did the woman begin? What did they go through, and what was sort of learned at the end? And with Carrie's life, I think there was a character arc. She was a bit of a spoiled girl. She had challenges in terms of her family situation, in terms of the fame, in terms of her bipolar that was not diagnosed for a very long time. And she had instant early fame. She had an inherited propensity to drug addiction. And toward the end of her life, she was parenting kind of both of her parents in a very loving, accepting way. She had gone through so much, and she was championing young people that had bipolar disorder. And she was dealing with the fact that she was fat-shamed and age-shamed, not just by being funny and sarcastic, but first of all kind of ushering in that kind of badass feminism and being part of the whole movement in that regard, but also she was able to be vulnerable about it. She cried about it. She said the internet hurts you, and so there was definitely a ripening of her character. She grew with all of this, and that was important for me to try to show, and I hope I did.
I did, because I think that before the internet, you could just have something, you could sculpt a story a little bit differently. Now stories are sculpted just by what people are putting out there and where it goes from there. And it makes a totally different way to be looking at things. We're in a totally different world as a result. Were you able to see through what people might want to hide about her? Were you able to try and, dig? Because from journalism, that's half the thing. They're trying to give you a story, and then you've got to go around the back end and really get in there.
Some people were very frank about challenging moments in her life. Other people started by saying, I want this to be positive. I said, I absolutely want it to be positive. There were things I left out. And did I see through? I mean, I knew she had challenges. It was clear. I mean, she had written about them, and when I talked to people, I could see that. Some I put in, but I was very careful to. I mean, people adored her, and the fact that she had challenges didn't get in the way of them adoring her. So it was not. So did I see through? Yes. When some people didn't want to talk about them, I understood, but I could find enough that was terrific anecdotes, and there are even more out there all over the place.
Well, it was interesting too, because we were talking about bipolar before. She also had this serious history of addiction, of what was happening that really wasn't hidden either, because it'd be very, very vocal about, this is what happened to me, I fell apart, all these kinds of things. And now we see so much of stories of addiction that's really being hidden in families and in lives and things like that. And I think that she just put this brand on it, that this is what's going on, deal with it. Like, you've got to figure out what to deal with it if you want to live or you want to die. Right. This is what you have to do.
Yeah,
and I thought that was very strong.
Yeah.
I love this quote, that she died before her brand of raunchily self-styled feminism, a candor she possessed all her life, swept over her town, her industry, and America. And it's like just such a great line.
Good, thank you. Yeah,
it was just such a great line.
It was easy to write.
It was easy to write, because it was because she was at that moment just before Me Too really started coming out, just before everything started, completely erupting and changing. I liked her script doctor rule, which was make the women smarter and the love scenes better.
Yes.
And I didn't realize how much script doctoring she'd done through the years.
She did much more than I wrote about. She did Lethal Weapon. She did tons of it, and she was considered one of the best script doctors Hollywood ever had.
Wow, because she could tighten and then also be exposition.
I mean, I didn't go into it in detail, what it was, but she gave a lot. I did one example with that guy Frank Caracci, the wedding singer, where he kind of lived at her house, as many people did, and she spent much more time on it than she thought she would, and she really delved into the character. Her name is Julia, so she wanted to listen to the Beatles song Julia. She really delved into characters, into characters and what to do.
And as a result, because I think she'd been on screen, she could actually sit there and say, how is this going to be performed? How is it going to, what am I going to give the actor or actress to go into these scenes and figure out what to do with it?
Yes, good point.
Because I think that, when you've sat on the other side, you're sitting there going, wait a second, this is what they're going to need here.
Right.
In order to, and how we can get this arc of a story going in a different direction that you might not be able to do. Okay, as a biographer, do you feel a huge responsibility hanging over you to get the story right?
People use the word biographer. I just think of myself as a writer.
Okay.
Do you feel a huge responsibility? Absolutely true. And when you make a mistake, whoa, it's embarrassing.
Right.
And there's fact checking. With magazines, it's wonderful. You have somebody else doing it for you. With books, you can pay, or you can do it yourself, or you can have a combination. And copy editors are wonderful. They do a little of it. And there's lots of facts. And there's
it's like dates. It's like even dates getting right, and when things actually happened.
Exactly. And how many things there are, and what is the definition of this. And the whole world of bipolar disorder is very hard to understand, especially for a non-medical writer like I am. And people disagree on it. I thought bipolar 1 was more serious than bipolar 2, and that's not the case. But it's complicated how they're different. I wrote an op-ed for USA Today about Carrie being a destigmatizer of bipolar, and it was well received, but the BP, the Bipolar Association, put it on their website, and then so we had to take it off because people were arguing about that difference between bipolar 1 and 2.
And she was 2? She was bipolar 2?
She was bipolar 1.
She was bipolar 1, okay.
But then I wrote a little addendum I'm sorry, I made a mistake, and I put it back on the website. And they took it off for another reason and said, well, don't worry, don't feel bad about this. People argue on our website all the time.
They argue on these topics because it's like mental illness is still a slippery slope about what's going on. And different doctors see things differently. I think that's the reason a lot of times when people are being diagnosed, it's what doctor is going to follow what kind of path and things like that as well. So I think it's tough to get it right. Were there parts that were painful for you to write? As you were writing, were there things where you say, wow, that's really emotional, I got to back away?
Good point. I look at it as a story, so I'm a little, divorced from the emotion. But certainly when she had that breakdown on the cruise ship, certainly when she went to do the performance with her mother at the Murat Theater in Indianapolis, she came off the plane kind of as a wreck. Eventually she pulled it together. But there were moments when she was humiliated or could have been humiliated, or they were challenging in ways that one could not help but empathize about. Indeed,
they're tough to write about it that way. Did your opinion of her change as you wrote?
It deepened. I mean, I really saw her complexity. So I don't know if it changed. It ripened, it deepened. I thought, wow, what a complex character. I'd started thinking not that hard about it, knowing, okay, she's complex, and then I realized how deeply complex she was.
Yeah, because it's like from chapter to chapter, all these different things are weaving into her life and what's going on. Everything from being really left as a child by her father to what happened to all her relationships with men through the years, and as well as her being a child star, just one thing after the other. Do you have a favorite Carrie Fisher book?
I think Postcards. Oh, you know what? Actually, Delusions of Grandma. Delusions of Grandma. She wrote about her friend. She named him William. She had two gay friends who died of AIDS. The one I knew about was Will. No, Will was the friend. He was a music fellow from Saturday Night Live, and she flew him out to L.A. to live with her. She nursed him. She took him to the hospital during his last moments. She rushed back and forth to Xerox or fax his living will to his friend in New York, and she wrote about his death, what happens when a friend dies, and what happens to a relationship you're in, and how everything is more intense. And she wrote it very beautifully. And I talked to somebody who kind of guided her through the process of writing that book, and I said, I think this is one of her best books, and this person said yes.
Yeah,
this
because
person agreed.
She was feeling the emotions, but also like how to tell the story at the same time. Most of her writing was great reading, but I feel like that she really nailed it in Wishful Drinking. I just feel like that had the writing, but it also had her comedic timing, like every single thing that worked.
Yes, it did work.
It really completely worked. Did you rewatch any of her films as you were writing?
I watched a bit of Hannah. I watched a bit of the Meg Ryan movie, When Harry Met Sally. I certainly watched a bit of Postcards. And, a lot of her interviews, her with Charlie Rose, her with this Canadian guy who interviewed her several times, Brian Linehan. She did good ones with him. I mean, there's no end to things you can find on the web.
On the web about her at this point. Did you research first and write later? Or what did you do?
Yeah.
Okay, so you do all your research up front, or if there's a gap as you start writing, do you go back and research, or you just keep writing and fill in the hole?
Both. I mean, you get your interviews, you keep getting them, you do research, then I sit and I chronologize the book. Okay, this person talked about different periods in her life. It was a childhood friend, but then met her in New York, and then did a movie with her, and then hung out with her. So I break it all down chronologically. And then I have kind of a map of where to go, what are, and do it that way.
Notes all over the place. How long did it take you to write?
Just in the computer. I don't tack things up.
Okay.
Well, I got the contract in, I think, February 2017, turned it into Sarah October 2018. Then we worked on it intensely, and she was amazing, till January 31st, 2019, and then more rewrite and a lot of putting the notes together, a lot of putting the footnotes together, and going through the copy edit, fact check, all that.
Yeah, which takes time. Which takes a lot of time. Yes, a lot of time. Brian Ward has come out and made a statement, and he made a statement, and I'm just going to, that he talked about that this book was done without their involvement. The only books about Carrie Fisher worth reading are the ones that Carrie wrote herself. She perfectly told us everything we needed to know. What would you like readers to take away from your book?
Well, I certainly was, I mean, you know, I wasn't happy hearing that, but he can say what he wants to say, and I respect him, and I have a great feeling of condolence for the family. What would I like? Well, I am gratified that the reviewers have found it very sympathetic. Booklist said it was profoundly sympathetic. Kirkus, despite their little snark here and there, said you have 300 pages to fall in love with Carrie Fisher. Even if you didn't keep up with her, you will miss her. Every review noted the sympathy involved. So in terms of, I'm pleased about that. What would I like to take away? I mean, you try to capture a person when you write about them, and I just hope I did it.
And what you want,
he has the right to say that, and she does come through in her books. I mean, those are her books.
They totally came through in her books, and I think that what you did is, as I was reading, is I just felt like I saw the whole Carrie Fisher. I think I saw her from a child, because in her books, well, she did address what it was like growing up in Hollywood, and where she, talked about this many, many times. I just feel like there was a compendium here that comes together of, this was this woman who did live life on the edge, but boy, she was a heck of a lot of fun.
Yes.
And I think that you can see why people loved her, and you can also see why she had moments where she loved herself, and where there were moments where she was in doubt with herself.
Yes.
And I think that's a really delicate balance for a writer to be going back and forth and being able to share both sides.
Oh, for
because
her?
To write even for you, for writing this, it's very, very difficult to go back and forth on what's going on and what's happening. So.
Well, it was challenging. Thank you for that. Yes. Yeah. You try to capture a person and with dignity, and she had dignity, and the challenges she lived with, the fact that she was so incredibly prolific as a friend, as a writer, as an actor, as a script doctor, again, as a friend, as a relative, is quite amazing.
I thought she lived every day to the max, like every single thing. And even if it was a low, it was the max low.
Right,
and then it had to come out to the max high of everything that was going on.
Yeah.
And I think that for defining that and knowing the lows, I think that she knew how to make the highs even better, because it was like there's going to be this other moment that happens as well.
Good point.
But I think you did a fabulous job of
Thanks,
capturing her. And
Appreciate
thank
it.
you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Right. Until next time, thank you from Book Reporter Talks To.